Fight cancellations are possibly the most common calamity this sport faces. It happens so often all across the card that it takes either a huge fight falling apart or an extraordinary circumstance for fans to even bat an eye about it. And today we're going to be focusing on the latter, with cancellations so far beyond the scope of your typical training injury or test fail that they're almost incomprehensible. I'm Tommy from MMA On Point. A massive thanks to our channel Hall of Famers for their awesome support, and these are the 10 craziest reasons a fight was called off.
That's it, fight fans. All right, it's UFC 309 this weekend. Jon Jones, Dana White's boy, the GOAT, he's back, finally over the injury, and he's going to fight Stipe Miocic. And of course, we're partnered with DraftKings, so you know we've got you covered. All new customers who bet just $5 on anything will get themselves $200 in bonus bets instantly. And if you want, you can stay in on the action. Use the $200 in DraftKings same-game parlays. You can combine multiple bets together, including the number of rounds and the method of victory. The more you combine, the more you can win. And if sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and still be in to win a shot at some cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now, and new customers use the promo code ONPOINT. Bet just $5 on anything and get yourself $200 in bonus bets. Instantly.
Number 10, Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson. Which time, am I right? Yeah, it's the fifth one. By the time the UFC booked this fight for the very last time, after the previous 4 attempts had fallen apart at various stages, only an act of God could stop it from happening. Yep, only an act of God. In late 2019, the UFC announced that they were going to give this obvious number 1 lightweight division fight yet another try, and everybody was jacked after the heartbreaking loss of the bout the last time when Tony tripped over a production cable after doing an interview. That is seriously some straight up the Omen shit.
Yeah, I fell on that same cord. I broke my back.
Anyway, in the weeks after this announcement, a virus would start spreading in the small 13 million person town of Wuhan in China, and by March, pretty much the entire world was at a standstill, with all major sports having completely shut down, including mixed martial arts. But after 5 missed shows, the UFC said, what if we just did fights without crowds? A temporary measure that would totally not end up being a thing that they would continue to do forever after that. And so Tony versus Khabib was back on and set for May 9th, but travel restrictions had gotten much heavier as the weeks went on, and Khabib was unable to get to the United States. Thus, the last ever time this fight would be official had ended in yet another cancellation.
We all made mistakes leading up to that, including me. I made mistakes too that ended up getting him stuck in Moscow.
While COVID would of course affect a whole bunch of other fights, this one certainly stands out as the most devastating and craziest out of all of them. Number 9, Cain Velasquez versus Fabricio Verdum 2. Words are the reason that this fight was canceled, and I don't mean mean ones or anything, but ones that led to an investigation by the governing body overseeing the bout. Cain Velasquez was meant to get a rematch for the heavyweight strap against Fabricio Verdum less than a year after losing it to him way up in the sky in Mexico City, but Cain's back was being held together by rubber bands and toothpicks, and so he reluctantly pulled out of that fight.
I was so bad where I had to take breaks in between tying my shoe. That's how bad it was.
Lucky for him, though, he'd get another chance to avenge the loss 9 months later when the whole thing was booked yet again. Then Velasquez said the words that would never make that possible. In the lead up to the bout, Cain did an interview with ESPN where he casually mentioned that his back was actually worse than when he pulled out of the previous attempt at this rematch, and that in fact, he couldn't even stand for more than 10 minutes at a time. Nevada caught wind of the interview, which as you'd imagine quickly made the rounds in the MMA circles, and decided to take another gander at Velasquez's medicals. The state's doc decided that it was probably in the best interest of Nevada to not let this guy who can only stand for 10 minutes compete in a major mixed martial arts fight.
Read the interview. Doesn't sound like he wants to fight to me. When you're a fighter and you do an interview days before a fight and say, you can't stand for 10 minutes. That's insanity.
The same would happen a year later when Mark Hunt didn't learn a single thing from Cain Velasquez and wrote a whole article about the issues he was having with his speech and memory as a result of his time in the cage, thus forcing the UFC to pull him from a scheduled fight with Marcin Tybura. Number 8, bizarre Hurt Business medley. Okay, so here's the thing. The vast majority of fights are called off because a fighter gets hurt, right? They tweak their knee in camp or they crack something. There's a million that we hear all the time. That said, there's still a pretty regular stream of absolutely bizarre medical issues that cancel fights. And so rather than try to go through all of them or have this entire list be focused on those types of situations, we're gonna lump them all together here and highlight some of the ones we feel are the most unique. Like that time Renan Barão was defeated by a bathtub trying to make weight, canceling his main event title fight with TJ Dillashaw. That's pretty wild.
I was fine. My weight was around regularly what I come in for fight week.
How can you be fine if you're blacking out while you're making weight? That's a very dangerous situation. It's very disappointing and very embarrassing, not just for you, but for the UFC.
Remember when Jamal Emmers suddenly had crazy intense back spasms after Chaz Skelly had already walked out to the cage for their fight?
And Jamal Emmers is backstage and suffering from back spasms. His body is shutting down on him right now.
One you might not remember as well, Betch Correia was pulled from a bout with Irene Aldana after a procedure to fix her astigmatism left her with vision too blurry for California to allow her to compete. The three that take the cake for me, though, are Bobby Knuckles pulling out of his title fight with Kelvin Gastelum just hours before when he realized his insides were all twisted up and he would need that fixed immediately or face far bigger consequences than a canceled bout. Hongman Choi getting pulled from his Brock Lesnar fight because he went to compete in the States for the first time and California was like, you know you actually have a benign tumor and we're not gonna let you fight, right? The craziest, though, is Brian Barberina's bout with Daniel Rodriguez getting canceled when during his last sparring session of camp, a light kick to the abdomen would almost see the end of Barberina. I cannot do this story justice. He has told the whole thing in several interviews. I would highly recommend watching one of them. It is truly a wild and harrowing story.
Yeah, I ruptured 2 arteries in my abdomen. It's a miracle that I'm here, honestly. It's a miracle. They said 2 minutes longer and I was a goner, so.
Number 7, Kevin Randleman versus Pedro Hizzo. You want to talk about crazy reasons for fights being canceled? If this one happened today, I cannot even imagine the reaction that social media would have. It would go so far beyond the mixed martial arts bubble because of how bizarre it is. But because it happened in the dark ages, most people only know about it if they're old or love our channel. Kevin Randleman was warming up backstage for his first heavyweight title defense against Pedro Hizzo when he did a Home Alone pratfall and knocked himself out, because that's what really happens when you fall that hard and hit your head.
Kev was out signing autographs, and on his way back to the backstage area, instead of using one of the marked exits or entrances or going through the main walkway, he went through the drapes. He goes down, whacks his head, cannot fight.
The exact reason for his fall, that's usually attributed to slipping on pipes, isn't fully known, but the resulting cancellation was handled in the worst and most hilarious way possible, with the then SEG UFC not even bothering to tell the fans in the arena until the end of the show. While that's certainly one of the craziest pre-fight moments that caused a cancellation, a special shout should go to Joilda Oliveira, who caught fire on his way down to the ring in pride thanks to some dummy setting off the pyro while he was standing on top of it, forcing the cancellation of his bout with Matt Serra, as you can imagine. He would make a full recovery in case you were worried after months at a medical facility and walk out to his next fight with a fire extinguisher. Number 6, Ricardo Mayorga versus Dean Thomas. During MMA's first big boom period following The Ultimate Fighter, you got a ton of little upstart promotions that try to get a slice of that sweet mixed martial arts pie. One such group was known as Shine Fights, and their big idea for one of their early events was to pit absolute lunatic boxer Ricardo Mayorga against everyone's favorite octagon side commentator Dean Thomas, who was still an active fighter at the time.
So I'm gonna put my foot in a boxer's mouth.
This little boxing MMA crossover was actually set to predate James Toney versus Randy Couture by several months, albeit on a much smaller scale given the names involved and the promotion itself, but nonetheless the bout was scheduled to be a pay-per-view headliner. That was until Don King figured out what was happening. Shine had signed the former WBC WBA champ for MMA bouts the year previous, a move that apparently went unnoticed by King, who had Mayorga under contract for boxing. Days before the fight, Don filed an injunction with a judge in Florida, with the court ruling that Ricardo would be breaching his contract and so was not allowed to participate in the event. Shine had every intention of moving forward with a new main event of Ninja Hua versus David Heath, but then the commission in North Carolina decided, you know what, we're not letting you hold this card anymore at all. And so the entire event was canceled, and despite some efforts for another show, Shine Fights would never put on another card. Number 5, Michael Chiesa versus Anthony Pettis. Something that's not often talked about when discussing the accomplishments of Conor McGregor is that he was able to get 3 separate fights canceled just by throwing a single dolly. That is some impressive stuff. In the lead up to UFC 223, McGregor, who I guess didn't have anything better to do at the time, loaded up a jet with some of his best buds and flew from Ireland to New York to attend the pre-fight presser for the event. Not because he was competing, but because now former best bud Artem Lobov had been accosted by main eventer Khabib Nurmagomedov, and he was gonna go give him a piece of his mind, I guess. The timing ended up being a bit off though, and the fighters were all loaded up on buses and ready to be shuttled out of the arena arena when Conor and his crew arrived. So they improvised and went full Street Fighter bonus stage on the vehicle. McGregor's dolly toss would see debris and glass that came flying into the bus force both Michael Chiesa and Ray Borg out of their scheduled bouts on the pay-per-view. Even worse for Chiesa, it put him out of the running for saving the main event when Tony Ferguson was forced out due to tripping on that cable I mentioned earlier.
I don't really got a lot to say to the guy. I mean, I lost a title shot. I have proof. I was the highest ranked guy on the card. I would have stepped in to fight Khabib at the drop of a dime.
I think this whole event just proves we're living in some kind of weird simulation. Oh, Artem also got pulled from his fight for participating in this whole stupid thing. Number 4, CB Dollaway versus Francimar Barros. Okay, stop me if you've heard this one before. CB Dollaway, Brad Tavares, Eric Nixick, Ray Sefo, Yancy Medeiros, Maki Patolo, Fabricio Verdum, and Uriah Faber all get in an elevator in a hotel in Cleveland. The punchline is that the cable breaks because that's way too many giant people, and the elevator plunges to the basement.
Final destination, you started dropping, and then the outside door closed, and it was still going down, and then the elevators closed, and we didn't know if we were going up or down, and then we were all talking like, oh, that was crazy, and then bam, we just hit. And
luckily for everyone, the elevator was only on the second floor of the building at the time. The incident took place at the Fighter Hotel after the weigh-ins for UFC 203, the very card that CM Punk debuted on before his epic run as a 3-division champion. Now, for the not-so-funny stuff, because as lucky as everyone was that the elevator wasn't higher when the cable broke, CB Dollaway, who was scheduled for a bout with Francimar Barros, did not leave the hotel unscathed. In fact, he was forced out of his fight and was left with permanent back damage. As a result, Dollaway would sue the hotel, as others who were on the elevator stated that it did not give any overcapacity warnings, and even began falling as the doors were still open. There's no word on whether CB won that lawsuit, but he would be able to continue fighting after the incident. Number 3, Thiago Silva versus Ovince St. Preux. Oh man, this one is not fun. Thiago Silva, not the one with the hammer on his chest, was a UFC mainstay from 2007 to 2013 who saw big fights with names like Lyoto Machida, Rashad Evans, and Alexander Gustafsson. But the Brazilian would end his relationship with the promotion in one of the craziest ways you could imagine, which was handled almost as poorly as you could imagine as well, but we'll get to that. Prior to a scheduled bout with Ovince St. Preux, Silva would find himself in police custody after showing up to a Florida gym to threaten his estranged wife and her alleged boyfriend, ADCC winner Pablo Popovich.
According to police, Thiago Silva threatened people at a jiu-jitsu school in Oakland Park last night, then barricaded himself inside his home.
This was the last in a string of incidents that had previously been reported to local authorities, and while I'm skipping over the details, this was some batshit behavior on Silva's part. If you want more info, go look it up, but the whole thing ended with a standoff.
Yeah, when the SWAT team is surrounding your house, probably a good chance you're in big trouble.
The next day, Dana White told media Thiago would never fight in the UFC again, and he was subsequently released from his contract. That was until a Florida judge for some reason dropped all charges a few months later. The UFC then immediately re-signed him, even though, it's not as if this incident didn't happen, or the previous issues that had him under court-ordered distancing from his wife in the first place. Hilariously, the promotion would only 2 weeks later again release Silva when a video of one of these insane incidents was posted online.
And obviously, if there was some type of video or something like that turned up on Thiago, then yeah, it would be a different story.
Truly, the UFC is awful at handling stuff like this. Number 2, Jon Jones versus Rumble Johnson. Yep, I can safely say I did not see this one coming, nor did the poor woman in the other vehicle. Light heavyweight champ JBJ had finally finished off his rivalry with Daniel Cormier and was ready to take on another huge challenge in absolute powerhouse Rumble Johnson. The fight generated massive hype for UFC 187, which was stacked up with dual title bouts at the top of the card. But 3 weeks before the fight, Jones would ruin everything, as he so often does, by striking another vehicle on the road in ABQ while driving like he was in a Fast and Furious movie, and then do the one thing you're literally not allowed to do afterwards: run away. The mother-to-be in the other vehicle would luckily be okay, relatively speaking, despite Jones not even bothering to check on her. Real upstanding citizen stuff.
Where I felt so untouchable, and I just felt like everything was meant to go my way in that time of my life.
John's resulting issues with the state of New Mexico would see the fight canceled and the champion stripped of his title. In his place, bitter rival Cormier would earn his first championship. Talk about adding insult to injury. Jones would serve a lengthy suspension, but return and never do anything bad again or have any problems. He learned his lesson. Number 1, Jordan Parsons versus Adam Piccolotti. Alright, so while this has been a pretty fun list, the end of this video will not in any way be fun.
Jordan was a fighter until the end. A car drives by going the speed limit. Moments later, a Range Rover flies down the street. It's the same car investigators believe hit Jordan Parsons, a 25-year-old aspiring MMA fighter, as he was crossing the street.
This is one of the most tragic stories this sport has ever produced. Jordan Parsons was a 25-year-old up-and-coming mixed martial artist out of the Midwest who had recently signed with Bellator and was scheduled for his 4th bout in the promotion at Bellator 154. 2 weeks before the fight, in Delray Beach, where he was training with the Black Zillions camp, Parsons was walking across an intersection near his apartment when he was struck by a Range Rover going in excess of 100 miles per hour. Several days later, Parsons would succumb to his injuries. The driver, who fled the scene and was under the influence, would eventually be charged and pled guilty, receiving just a 10-year prison sentence, which is absolutely insane to me. In a released statement, Scott Coker said, "Jordan was an exceptional young man. Jordan was hardworking, dedicated, intelligent, and a pleasure to be around. He represented all the reasons we love this sport." All the major promotions paid tribute to Parsons at their events following his passing.
Just want to thank Jordan for being an amazing member of our team. You'll be missed by many, brother. Godspeed. Thank you so much for letting me learn to know you.
Jordan was a close training partner of mine, so yeah, this fight was for Jordan.